A snowman appeared near my house 2 weeks before the new year. He just appeared. I'm not kidding. Well, in fact, some late revelers couldn't have blinded him in the middle of the night in literally half an hour and disappeared without a trace. And most importantly, silently. In other circumstances, I would not have even paid attention to it, but my nerves were at their limit at that moment. There was nothing left before the holidays, and there was not a lot of money for gifts. Back in the summer, a girl extracted a promise from me to give her a new laptop, and my parents actively hinted at a healthy lifestyle, which was only hindered by the lack of a decent juicer. In the end, I made a strategic decision to take on urgent orders for technical translations. Orders were sent to me late in the evening, and they gave me literally until the morning to complete them. No one canceled official work either, and by the time the snowman appeared, I was already experiencing all the symptoms of chronic lack of sleep and had seriously developed useful skills for sleeping in minibuses, buses, and the subway. The only thing that saved me from passing out right at the computer was coffee and cigarettes. In the end, I got into the habit of running onto the balcony several times an hour to smoke in order to at least recover a little from the cold. It was during one of these smoke breaks that I saw a snowman. I could have sworn it wasn't there last time. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and if some cheerful company had wandered into our yard, I would definitely have heard it from my second floor. Moreover, the snow around the snowman was absolutely clean, without any signs of any traces. And he looked straight at me. I don't know why, but I felt very uncomfortable. It's like someone is really staring at me with an icy stare. I really wanted to turn away, whatever, close the balcony door behind me, and draw all the curtains to be safe. The rational part of me did not want to give in to a primitive snowcraft, so to the detriment of all humanity, I stared at the snowman. A snowman is like a snowman, disproportionately short arms like branches, a nose like a carrot, and an upside-down popcorn bucket in his voice. Except that his eyes were rather strange, as if they were made of dark glass. The light of the lanterns reflected in them with bright reflections every now and then. I angrily put out my cigarette and returned to work, hoping that tomorrow the neighbor's kids would raze the freak to the ground. However, I never went out onto the balcony that night. Then the days dragged on as usual. Work in the office, work at home, sleep in fits and starts. I even got used to the stupid snowman, who remained standing, untouched by the local kids, as if they were avoiding him. And when there were only a few days left until the new year, something changed. At first, I couldn't understand what exactly, but one night it dawned on me. The snowman was getting closer. I remembered exactly that when I saw him for the first time, he was standing near the playground, and now he was sticking out under a maple tree about 2 meters from it. But this is nonsense. Who would move a snowman? However, an obsessive thought clung to me like a burr. I tried to remember well the place where the snowman stood then, and every time I went out onto the balcony I compared my observations with reality. Finally, I had to admit that he was indeed moving. During the night, he covered about 1 meter. Our neighbors really making fun of each other in such a strange way. I immediately excluded myself from the potential targets of these jokes. Firstly, because he lived in this house relatively recently, and secondly, because he never managed to get to know anyone enough to even just nod when they met. But I clearly jumped to conclusions. On the night of December 30-31, somewhere around midnight, I went out for my first ritual smoke break and immediately met the eyes of a snowman. He was standing right under my balcony, and his branch-like hand was pointing directly at me. Behind the snowman there was a clear straight line, as if something was being dragged through the snow. I found it difficult to maintain a semblance of calm. After all, if it was me who became the object of jokes, then the jokers themselves are probably somewhere nearby and watching me. I calmly finished my cigarette and went into the room, making considerable efforts not to turn around. For the next few hours, I diligently fought the urge to go to the balcony and see how it would all end. Although the outcome was probably expected to be the most predictable, most likely I should have been greeted by the complete absence of a snowman and the ominously ajar door to the entrance. And so it happened. When curiosity finally won, the only reminder of the snowman was the popcorn bucket lying below, which served as his hat. Frankly, I was a little disappointed. Then I went back to work and diligently translated the microwave instructions until I felt terribly cold. I checked all the windows and went to the kitchen to make myself some tea. Suddenly, the ceiling light blinked several times, as if it was about to burn out. I shuddered, not so much from surprise, but from the fact that the apartment became terribly, abnormally cold. The breath came out of my mouth in clouds of steam. The light went out again, and the apartment was plunged into darkness for a few seconds. These seconds were enough for me to hear the front door creaking. The front door, which I locked and chained when I returned home. When the light came back on, there was a snowman standing in the doorway. Now on his cartoonish face, in addition to glass eyes and a carrot, a mouth appeared. A deep hole studded with icy needles. The snowman's mouth stretched into a kind of grin, and he slowly moved towards me. The branch arms wriggled and looked more like tentacles. There was nowhere to retreat. I pressed myself against the wall and looked in horror at the approaching monster, unable to believe that everything was really happening. This simply could not happen. The snowman quickly covered the distance separating us and tried to grab my hand. Fortunately, I was brought out of my stupor by the click of a boiling electric kettle. Mechanically, I grabbed the kettle and threw all its contents onto the snowman. There was a terrible squeal and the snowman began to melt very quickly. Soon, all that was left was a muddy puddle and a few shards of black glass. Strange, but the air temperature immediately returned to normal, and I felt a sharp pain in my forearm. The snowman still managed to catch me. I wrapped a towel around the deep scratch as best I could and passed out right there, in the kitchen. I came to my senses only the next day. Celebrating the new year was out of the question. I only had enough strength to remove the fragments and wipe up the puddles on the floor. It was not possible to find any traces of the snowman. The door was locked. The water on the floor clearly came from a kettle lying nearby, and I most likely cut myself with a piece of my own cup. Is this really all a consequence of lack of sleep? I didn't manage to figure it out, because terrible fatigue came over me, and for the next 2 weeks I lay with a terrible cold, a consequence of frequent smoking on the balcony. Almost a year has passed since then. I attributed all the events of last December to overexertion and promised myself to sleep at least 6 hours a day from now on. But since the snow fell, it has become increasingly difficult for me to fulfill my vow. No, not because of work. It's terribly hot in my apartment. I'm literally drenched in sweat and can't sleep a wink. The windows wide open no longer help. And if during the day I can still somehow concentrate, then at night all I do is imagine ice and endless snowy plains. A few days ago I couldn't stand it anymore and went outside. The moon was shining. The snow sparkled under the light of rare lanterns. It was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning. The windows in the surrounding high-rise buildings were dark. I walked, enjoying the coolness, until I found myself in front of a house where a light was on the 3rd floor. I stopped there and just stood there for several hours until the lights went out. The next night I went to that house again. I managed to see a young woman, even a girl, sitting at the computer. She seemed to be smiling at something, and I couldn't take my eyes off her windows. One day she seemed to sense something because she opened the window and looked outside, but I stood in the shadows and went unnoticed. The next evening I saw her decorating the Christmas tree. As if hypnotized, I stood in the yard, not even daring to move. The snow fell, and by morning it turned out that it almost completely covered me, and I didn't even notice. With difficulty, I forced my numb limbs to move and wandered home. I don't know what's happening to me and I can't help myself. Every evening I promise myself not to go anywhere, quietly watch TV or read a book, call my girlfriend, whom I haven't spoken to for a week, but as soon as night falls on the city, I am overcome by an irresistible desire to go to that courtyard and stand looking at the illuminated window's 3rd floor, gradually making its way closer and closer. More and more often I find myself thinking that I don't need to return home at all. All that awaits me there is suffocating heat and annoying calls from work. I hope someone reads this and explains what's going on. There must be some logical explanation for this. And now I need to go. I must.